and thank you for joining me today in another segment of Living Forward. My goal on this show is to focus on and to help others live the very best life possible after the onset of a disability or a chronic illness. Earlier this month, I traveled by myself to New York City for 10 days. Today, I'm going to discuss my trip, including what it was like for someone to travel to such a big city in a wheelchair. Before I left, I registered online for a Big Apple greeter to show me around New York City. The Big Apple Greeter is a nonprofit agency that has a program specifically designed for travelers with a disability. My tour of New York City with Julie, the host for Big Apple Greeter, was photographed by the professional photographer Paul Margolis, and the photographs will be used in their advertising. I'm going to show you some of these pictures so I can take you along throughout my voyage around New York City. Taking risks and doing things that we used to do is so beneficial to one's mental health and well-being. Today I will discuss some of the things all of us can do, regardless of our circumstances, in order to have new experiences and adventure in our lives. I'll conclude the show today by giving you some travel tips from what I learned on my trip to help make your trip a little easier. After I had my spinal surgery and became paralyzed, my life changed. And I remember for the first year I was in so much pain that all I could do was lay in a fetal position, shocked that life could be lived in such a chronic and painful condition. Slowly, I started to get better, but initially my world was very, very small, and it consisted of my bed, my armchair, and my wheelchair, and the comforts of my home. And in talking with other people who have disabilities, I've discovered that many people have a similar experience. So for me, going to New York City was just an accumulation of what had been building up in me for quite a while now. And going to the biggest city by myself was an expression of my desire to take risks again and to have adventure in my life and just to feel alive again. The day after I arrived in New York City, Julie, my Big Apple greeter, and Paul, the photographer, met me outside my hotel. Originally, I came downstairs in my regular chair, but after talking with Julie, I realized that we had a full day ahead of us. And while I was in New York, I rented a power chair from a medical supply company that was absolutely the best decision that I could have ever made. That power chair served as my individual transportation system, and I was able to cover a lot of ground. Having this option made a huge difference in my trip. Julie's a 20-year veteran of New York City and is used to pushing herself through the city in a wheelchair. And boy, believe me, that takes a lot of arm strength that I just don't have. So here we are in the Big Apple van. They arranged for an accessoride van to pick us up. And so here we are inside the van. You'll notice that we're all strapped in for safety. This is similar to an accessoride that we have here. New York City is an interesting city in that many buildings are split entry, meaning that there are steps going up to a place of business, and then at the same time there are steps going down to a business. So here you'll see us looking up at the stairs going up to the business, and the next shot, stairs going down to the business. Some of the buildings, really have limited access, but it is possible to visit some of the stores. There are plenty of stores that have shops that are street level and have easy access. In New York City, most streets have a cutout at the curb, as you'll notice here, which is similar to what we have here in the Twin Cities. But there are many, many streets that don't have a cutout. So when you can't get off, sometimes you can't get on the sidewalk, and then sometimes you'll be on the sidewalk and you can't get off, and there's nowhere to go. You have to go all the way around. Again, here's another curb that doesn't have a cutout. Then there's the option of using the bike path, which I thought was a lot of fun. Saved a lot of time cruising along on the bike path. You just have to watch out for the bikers. They're crazy in New York. But here we are in Brooklyn with the view of Manhattan behind us. And then here we are leaving Manhattan, and notice that they still have some cobblestone streets in Brooklyn. It's beautiful old architecture. That day we saw many sights, including here the Statue of Liberty, Macy's. Here I am pictured outside of Macy's. They closed off the front of Macy's and Times Square, and it creates kind of a plaza effect, so people can kind of sit down and people watch. Here is a picture of Ground Zero. They're still building it, as you can see. And of the New York Times. Central Park. Rockefeller Center. Look at things always look different when you're sitting up and when you're sitting down and looking up and taking a picture, doesn't it? And then here we go. After a day of touring, we stopped by a friend's home to have some tea. Here's a picture of the ramp that was installed in their building in order to make it wheelchair accessible. This is just a great example of how everyone can make their buildings accessible. And it's a simple and it's an affordable solution. Here I am interviewing Julie for one of the many articles that I write. And Julie is an amazing woman. She lives in New York and has traveled all over the world to Australia, Singapore, Hong Kong, India, England, all over Europe and Africa. And all of that she did from her wheelchair. I asked her how she did it, and her advice to me was not to be too involved in too many hospital-like programs. Just get out there and do it. Figure out a way. I remember thinking of the Nike campaign and realizing that that's probably how all champions must think. So here we are, about to travel by subway. And I'm telling you, this was my best experience. Why? Because I was so scared to do it, and because this is something that I used to do all the time. In my late teens and early 20s, I used to model for Eileen Ford Modeling Agency in New York, and I had taken the subway many, many times before, just not in a wheelchair. So in the following pictures, you will follow my progression throughout my subway experience. So here we are getting into the specially made accessible elevators that go down into the subway. Here we are coming off the elevator into the subway system and going through the turnstile, going through the gate. Obviously, I couldn't fit through the turnstile with a chair. Here we are in the subway, and I'm all smiles because I'm so excited to do this. And a similar situation in the Twin Cities might be the light rail system. So just keep this in mind, that light rail system here in Minneapolis is accessible. Okay, here we are in the subway. We have to kind of pick our points of exit because most of the subway exits are accessible, but not all. Here we are waiting for the train. I'm actually on the platform. You got to go right up to the train platform before you can get on. It's a little scary, but here we are actually on the train, the last picture. Here we are smiling and waving because we're so happy to have accomplished something that seems so overwhelming to even try it. So there we go. While I was in New York, I learned a lot about myself, and I gained some experience in traveling with a disability. And I want to share some of those important travel tips and reminders with you. In doing so, I hope you may use this information when you plan your next trip. This, of course, is not all of the travel advice available, but some of the most important in my mind. Number one, be sure to call your hotel and confirm that the wheelchair accessible room is truly wheelchair accessible. Number two, beware of rented medical equipment and use extra care. My first day there in my rented chair, I wanted to take a nap, and while positioning the chair next to my bed, I dislodged a cord, and earlier I had hinged the door in my room as there was a mix-up in my room. So when I woke up and tried to get out, I realized I couldn't move the power chair, and to make matters worse, my door was hinged, making it impossible for anybody to come in and rescue me, and the hotel phone was out of my reach. So I was basically stranded in my own room. Luckily, I had my cell phone and was able to call the hotel and ask for assistance, which brings me to my next travel.